All right, after our pretty contemporary talk yesterday, we talked about a lot of things. It was a lot of fun about freedom and how preserving freedom of choice is of the utmost importance. All right. Yeah. But we're going to continue where we left off. Wednesday. We left off here. Wrote two pieces, which explained his ideas of contract and explained his ideas on the relationship between citizen and the government. He believed that people after free, equal, and rights to life and property, which is the social contract theory in general. And our question today was phrased in this: equality, not each citizen of the United States has those things. Declaration of Independence, including the Constitution, the ideas behind the French Revolution, all reflected the philosophy expressed by John Locke in the book Two Cities. All right? Are you still standing? What did you say? Oh, it's a different thing. Okay. I'll explain it to you. Government colonies. 13 colonies between 16 and 1730. England, 1607 being Massachusetts colony. That died very quickly because it was severely underestimated how long it would take to travel across the Atlantic, and they were woefully unprepared to deal with the fact that nothing there matched new and love their homes. Unable to produce new things to eat and pretty much died of starvation. Some of them died from diseases never been exposed to from the Native Americans. Nice little treat, sent the same thing back to them when we started mass immigration of the colonies of the United States, and we killed, I think we're at 12 million, I think is the count of Native Americans responsible for the American government. So I think only about 2 million. We were technically the United States. So there you go. Actually grew rapidly in the colonies. Here's something people tend to forget or understand well, is that because there was a king that was in charge of England that had all over the colony, doesn't mean that the colonies didn't understand what democracy was. Democracy all over the place in there. Elected representatives, and we elected a group made decisions on local politics, on the big thing. Didn't really have much of it, but we know how it worked. And for the most, all free persons got the ability to vote, unless you were born as or pretty much white dudes. White dudes that land. And every colony, some type of pre-qualification, you had to own the property. If you weren't a property owner, they thought you were not properly vetted in the country, therefore your opinion did not matter moving forward. Property owning and the qualification of owning have moved entirely. So you do own property in order to vote. 9 of the 13 colonies had an official church. That's a lot of people. I would say most everybody who was traveling from where they were to the colonies religious freedom. Religious freedom means starting your own colony. That's the only religion you have in the colony. So religious freedom is actually the ability to force to follow my religion in a new. Yeah.
What's the main reason we're here? Like, place with freedom, like just they told what to like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
They didn't allow democracy or the thought of monarchy, and wanted democracy. Also wanted the ability to have religion. So basically, at this time, it had a religion, had to practice that religion, or no. People want the death every day for practicing what they believed in, like a religion is pretty rooted a person's soul, and they wanted to have that. But you had to follow religion if you lived in that colony. So really religious freedom, hey, everybody do the thing. It's hey, who wants to do the thing as I do here. All right. Many colonies are intolerant of dissent. So the founding fathers, being non-Christians, sort of influenced how the United States was created, right? I think of the 51 founders for Christian. So that's another myth that's found that the United States is a Christian nation built on Christianity. It's hard not to laugh at because it's not the case. Factually, a majority, plurality to be safe, were deists who there was some kind of God. They didn't follow a specific religion. A few atheists, a few Christians followed Judaism, followed the Church of England. Yeah.
So the first one is like they use a God.
They don't like it's not this. They just think that there's something that's a higher being, but they don't think that anybody has the right idea of what's happening. Yeah. So yeah, another common myth, not a Christian nation, founded on Christianity. We were founded on diversity. We were founded on the ability to follow whatever religion it is that you want and still get the founding of the United States. So family members, you are more than welcome to correct them if you feel like starting a conversation and have things that you want to help. Right? If you are having that conversation, then go for it. If you silently want to know that you have more than they do on the topic and keep that to yourself and smile, you are to do that as well. Each country, though, had an independent government. I'm reading what you can't see right now, so make sure you're paying attention. Each colony had an independent government, so each colony had their own government. Each colony had a written constitution. Means that they had rules. They had guidelines for the government, what the government could and could not do. Pretty important, right? As it pertains to the English Bill of Rights. English Bill of Rights was huge, and the colonies understood that and tried to give themselves a little pause in the broadcast, but that's okay. Hopefully you were able to hear me the whole time. If not, listen up. I'm speaking to hypothetical listeners for those of you that are weirded out right now.
Yeah, I watched it.
Watch them every day, right?
No, I watched it once and I can
Yeah. So, in addition to the written constitution, they also have a legislature and separation of powers, where each branch had certain responsibilities. So we didn't just rip something out that we didn't know anything about when we made our government. We took pieces of government that we knew and that we had practiced. We had written constitutions in each colony. We had separation of powers. We'd had legislatures. And instead of allowing the king or the monarch to determine what we were going to do, we just gave that power to the people and took what we were already doing and blew it up to a national level. That's what happened. Okay? So that's another thing people think is that the United States was just crazy and did something totally new that nobody knew about, and it's not true. It's just not how it happened. Right? So forms of written constitutions. The United States has the oldest written constitution in the world, and that's because we did our research. So first let's talk about the Mayflower Compact. Pretty easy. Signed on the Mayflower, key feature of the colonial period when people were traveling from Western Africa and Western Europe to the United States, or what would become the United States. They basically said, hey, we're going into unknown territory, literally uncharted territory. Like there's no map to know where you're going. So they decided they were going to come up with a plan on how they were going to govern themselves. They wrote it down, and it became the Mayflower Compact. Very first example of a self-government plan. What I mean by self-government is the people who were the ones who were going to have to follow these rules were also the people who designed the rules, right? It's democracy in its most basic form. It is, I will do this because I voted to say that I would do this, versus I will do this because somebody who spoke to God told me to do this, or somebody who has a really powerful military told me to do this. It is literally self-rule. 1636, about 3 years after that first colony in Massachusetts, Plymouth adopted something called the General Fundamentals, the first basic system of laws. So when you see the word general fundamentals, think about it as the fundamentals, right? As the very basic things, right? There are rules that you have to follow here in the United States, laws that are set out. So think about the general fundamentals as this big book of you can't do these things, right? Killing be one of those things. Murder, yes. Yeah, cannot murder. But the general fundamentals included very basic things, but also very specific things, because the general fundamentals didn't affect the entire colonial era or the colonial area either, right? That time period or that area. It eventually spread out as an idea, and other colonies wrote their own version of their own laws. But this one's very important because the general fundamentals sort of gave us the baseline of how to write laws. All right, again, 3 years later, the Puritans left Massachusetts Bay. They sort of realized that the people there didn't follow the same rules that they had. They didn't have the same guidelines and the same beliefs and morals. So they left Massachusetts Bay. They went over to Connecticut and drew up America's first formal constitution, meaning they wrote it down to be a constitution versus just writing some stuff down and said, oh, I guess this is a constitution. This was done on purpose, called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Yes, Connecticut is spelled correctly on the board. I know it looks weird. That is how you spell Connecticut. Yeah, Connecticut. Connecticut is how it's pronounced. All right. So America's first formal constitution is known as the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. All right. These terms, the Mayflower Compact, that plan for self-government, was built into our Constitution. The general fundamentals, those basic laws, are what we use to maintain order, part of that social contract. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut showed us what it meant to design a constitution so that we could self-govern, so that we could have proper rules in place that people were going to support and that people were going to follow, so that the social contract could be upheld, right? And the Fundamentals of Connecticut did something pretty important here. There it is. Yeah. It's awesome, right? All right, laid out a plan of government, gave the people the power to elect representatives. Super, super important for a couple reasons. Representative government and republics are still in use today here in the United States. We elect other people who are experts in their given areas in politics to make decisions for us because they are more informed. They can sort of see the whole picture, kind of what's going on, right? Even now, that is something that happens. But it was even more important then because of something we've already talked about. Information took months to get places, right? If it ever got there. So the ability to say, hey, we're not going to be able to efficiently communicate. We're not going to be able to be well informed. I understand that. So here you go. Make my decisions for me. Do what's best for us. And then when it's all said and done, then we'll get the information, right? Now, not such a crucial thing, but America has grown to such a services industry, meaning we provide goods and services versus producing things. That's just what our economy is now, right? This is even more important than people realize, because being a direct democracy requires you to be so incredibly up to date and informed on everything and anything that's happening within your government that you couldn't possibly put all of your focus into something you're passionate about. So it sort of allows you to, I don't want to say be lazy, but be lazy as far as your government goes. All right. Unavailable.
Let's restrict it, Mr. Westwood.
I'll unrestrict it. You know, I feel like they give me too much power here. Like, I feel like I control too many things. And I really don't control that many things to begin with. It's just that that's a little, you know, a little scary. Yeah, remember that I like people who talk fast because I think they're more efficient. So this person's probably going to talk fast.
When the Pilgrims finally reached America, not only were they late, but they were in the wrong place. They had went as far as the This was a big deal because this was not a land pact. It stated they were descendants, and it meant winter would soon be upon them, and they were low on food and supplies. Before disembarking, the Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact. The Pilgrims knew that some earlier settlements of the New World had failed due to the lack of government. The Mayflower Compact was a social contract in the form of a sacred covenant sworn before God, in which the settlers stated their purpose for coming and consented to follow the rule and regulation of the government for the sake of survival. The government, in return, will derive its power from the consent of the government. The short little agreement is often referred to as the foundation of the Constitution of the United States and a cornerstone of American government. Future U.S. President John Quincy Adams, who also had ancestors on Mayflower, would later describe the Mayflower Compact as the only instance in human history of that positive original social compact that many believe is the only legitimate source of truth. So modern textbooks have stripped out the compact's sacred language in order to be politically correct. Find an unaltered copy and read it. Wire that read the book.
That's the video.
Right? So after that, the video sucks, so I don't watch the rest of it. All right? But here's the principle. A lot of the founding fathers saw what was happening with the Mayflower Compact and realized that it was incredibly important. Very, very, very important. Right? So very much so, all of these documents here, all of these written documents shaped who we became as a country. Soon after, other colonies followed suit after they saw the fundamental orders of Connecticut, and they said, hey, we should probably do that too. It's a good idea. It gives the citizens power. It allows us to make the decisions that are best for us. And the very first legislature in America, going back a little bit, was the Virginia House of Burgess in 1619. For some reason, people tend to forget this. I do ask you about this later. Highlight it if you have to. Underline it. Do what you need to do. All right? People tend to forget about the Virginia House of Burgess. So those other colonies used their legislature, like the Virginia House of Burgess, to draft their own constitutions. 1636, when the Puritans in Massachusetts forced their leaders to reorganize the government so that each town elected 2 representatives in their legislative branch. And all of you are sitting in your desk saying, oh my God, why are you teaching us something so incredibly boring? Can you think of a branch of the United States legislative branch, or a house, I should say, of the United States legislative branch that elects 2 representatives regardless of population? The Senate. This is literally where we got the idea for the Senate. From 1636, a religious group in Massachusetts said, hey, everybody gets equal representation. Right? Now, we're going to talk later when we talk about the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan and the Connecticut Compromise. And that's sort of how we got the 2-chambered houses. The one plan really wanted to have a Congress based solely on population. The other wanted it solely based on equal representation among states, because they thought small states would get overpowered by larger states. So what did we do? We did both, right? We did both. One by population, one by equal representation. And it helps balance things out. It gives the small states a little voice, and it gives the big states a little more power because they have more people. All right? But by the mid-1700s, not only was democracy something that the colonists knew about, it was something that had been an established tradition. They couldn't understand that a government would function any other way, right? And since democracy had been ingrained, those individuals who were born in the colonies and became young adults around the time we fought the Revolutionary War couldn't begin to understand why a monarchy would ever have power, which is sort of the passion, the drive for those individuals to fight in the war for independence. I'll hardly ever call it the American Revolution because that's a stupid title. It's not a revolution, it's a war. and there's a big, huge difference, right? But it was a war for independence, and those people said, I don't understand this. It's always been a representative government. Why are we listening to somebody who lives thousands of miles away who's making unreasonable, ridiculous demands upon us and not allowing us to have a voice in our government? They rose up and they fought against that tyranny. And here we are, right? Yeah. Damien wanted to applaud those militia members, and I agree. Sure. No, it's okay. All right, so everybody that was in the colonies understood that democracy is key. Democracy is the way to govern, right? You govern yourself through the transfer of power in your voice, in your vote. The rapidly growing colonies needed new laws to cope with new circumstances, right? So all of a sudden, all of these people are showing up, and all the people that are there are having a bunch of kids who are then growing up and having a bunch of kids, and population starts to explode, and there are people everywhere. So in order to deal with the increased population and the increased demands on the public, they had to come up with new ideas on how to construct public buildings. They started building schools, they started building courthouses, they started building fire stations, they started building police stations, would have been marshal's offices at that time. They started building all kinds of things for the public to use, and they collected tax dollars to do these things, very much like how our system works in the modern United States. You pay your taxes, the government collects your tax dollars, they use those tax dollars in whatever way they think is going to benefit the public the most. It's very similar to what we have here in the legislature. Is the group that decides how that money is going to be spent. These legislatures were examples of a key principle of democracy that we still follow today. Consent of the governed. That means the people who have to follow the rules have to agree to the rules in the first place. If not, your government is illegitimate. It is not recognized. It is unlegit. And, sorry, if you don't have consent of the governed, if the people who have to follow the rules don't agree to the rules in the first place, it's illegitimate government. Right? But here's the key. In order to make sure that your government is as legitimate as possible, you need enormous voter turnout. The only way we can certainly say that our government is 100% effective is if 100% of all voters showed up to vote every single time. But the highest voter turnout we've ever had here in the United States is around 63% of registered voters. Usually we're around the 40% range. That number goes up in midterm elections, which is this year. We'll see around a 50% voter turnout, maybe higher because these tend to be really important elections that are going on right now. Right? Presidential elections are the highest voter turnout. Young people are the smallest group of voters, traditionally speaking, but have been growing for the last decade or so. Voters between 18 and 24 are voting in higher percentages than they ever have before. If you want to know how to register to vote, I'm going to show you in a fun way.
Already registered, so
good. Men, if you want to register to vote, you have to register for the draft first. You are required by law. You cannot vote unless you are registered for the draft. You also cannot receive financial aid for college unless you are registered for the draft. Women, just register to vote. That's it. No qualifications, right? Is that unfair?
No.
Yeah, it is.
if I have to register to go die.
Yeah, but I'm 26, so I'm out of the draft. So I can't be drafted anymore. All right. Colonial government had structure. They had a governor who functions a lot like our governor does today. They just enforce the state laws or the colonial laws. But that governor, instead of being elected by the people, was usually appointed by the king. So think about it this way. It would be like the president handpicking the governors of each state. Right? Sounds pretty scary to me. The legislatures, however, were made up of elected colonists. So the colonists did get to choose who was in the legislative branch, but power leaned pretty heavily towards the governor, pretty heavily towards the executive branch, and the legislative branch suffered. So much so that in Ohio, we sort of made a mistake. We're going to talk about it later in the year, but in 1803, we wrote up a constitution that gave the legislature way too much power. And we ended up rewriting it in 1851, which is sort of the current constitution we have. We also kind of made some changes in 1917, but the 1851 constitution is the big one in Ohio, because we were worried that we were going to give too much power to the executive and legislative branch, and we accidentally gave them too little for them to be effective. All right, so you can't overcorrect when it comes to these types of things. Separation of powers was vital to the United States Constitution, and I think that's a pretty easy thing to understand, right? You can't give one group all the power, or they will take that power and become tyrannical by theory, right? If I told you, hey, you get to enforce the laws, and you get to make the laws, and you get to determine who broke the laws, you could do whatever you wanted. You could make any law and any regulation that you saw fit that benefited you. It's the same reason that we attempt to prevent monopolies. Because if you're the only product that can be sold, then you can do whatever you want. You can sell an inferior product for a superior price, and people would have to pay for it if they want. So we have to take power, split it equally among the branches, and that way each branch has to communicate. Each branch can check the other branch. Colonial legislatures became basically political training grounds. It was sort of boot camp for the founding fathers. They were young, they were hungry, and they got thrown into a pit and said, hey, figure it out. And so colonial, excuse me, colonial America was basically where our founding fathers figured out how to be politicians. They figured out how government should be run in their opinion. And so when it came time to write the Constitution, when it came time to fight the war for independence, they were ready. They knew what they were doing. So we didn't have a bunch of people who had no idea what was going on, kind of figuring it out. These were well-established, highly experienced individuals in government making decisions, which sort of more alludes to why our Constitution has been so successful for so long here in the United States. All right. Their combination of the English heritage, so the value of education, because this was just after the Enlightenment, kind of during the Enlightenment, like John Locke and Leonardo da Vinci and those people, even, what's the one I'm missing, Galileo, those types of people who were basically saying, hey, there are other explanations for things that are happening in the world than God did it, right? There's scientific explanation for things. So these people took that intelligence, understood those principles, which is primarily why they weren't considered Christian, because they believed in science and those types of things. But they took that heritage, they took their intelligence, and they took their experience, and they put them all together and used that information to basically wage a war of independence, or a revolution, if you want to call it that, even though it's not. Okay? So if you're wondering why I don't call it a revolution, technically a revolution is the overthrow of an existing government. We didn't overthrow an existing government. We just said we want to be a new government. So it's a war for independence, not a revolution. France was a revolution. That was their citizens overthrowing the existing government and putting in a new government. That's a revolution. This is not. But you know it as the American Revolution, so I'm not going to reinvent the wheel and call it something else. You know what you know, so there you go. Okay? War for independence, American Revolution, we're both talking about the same thing. Any questions?
No.
Good, because that's it.
Oh, yay. Oh, yeah.
We're all done. History lessons are over. Back to government. All right? So does everybody understand the purpose of why we covered this content?
Yes. A refresher.
No. Gabriel.
The show what happened
It's basically, yeah, it's how we took our past experiences and what happened. We took other things that people had done in the colonies, and that is how we came together and built the structure of our government and how we wrote our Constitution, right? So all of these things we just talked about are the basis of our Constitution. So I'm a big believer in if you want to know where you're going, you got to know where you've been, and that's where we've been. And I'm going to take you where we're going, where the colonists were going, where the founding fathers were going. All right? Awesome.